Hello everybody, welcome to this SE UK webinar on funding and finance. With us here today is Ishita from Good Finance. She's the project manager at Good Finance, and she is in charge of driving the direction of this project, managing the website content strategy and coordinating with stakeholders and partners. So without further ado, let's hand over to Ishita.
Thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here. It's lovely to be with SE UK. I should also say that Good Finance, we do quite a lot of work with SE UK as well, and lots of work with your marketing team especially, so it's really lovely to join the webinar this morning. So should I get started, or do we want to wait a couple more minutes for people to join?
We've got a few join us, so I think we can get going, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Brilliant. Cool. So before we sort of get going, it would be really lovely to know who is with us today. So if you want to pop your name and organisation in the chat and say hello, that would be really lovely. Just helps me get a sense of who's joining. So what we're going to do this morning is we are going to be talking about different finance options for charities and social enterprises, focusing especially on good finance and the tools on Good Finance, and looking really at social investment, which is what we're set up to support with. So to give a bit of context, hello Andrew and hello Jim. Oh, Sally, Melissa. Oh, lovely to hear from lots of you in the chat. Thank you. It's just really nice for me to know who's here. So Good Finance is a very, very collaborative project, and our mission is to help charities and social enterprises navigate and sort of understand the world of social investment. So we are supported by lots of different partners and a couple of different funders, but inherently we are user-led. So everything that we kind of create and do is for charities and social enterprises, and sort of spearheaded by charities and social enterprises. So it's been a really interesting year, and we've done lots of lots of work reaching out and sort of understanding what charities and social enterprises need at the moment. But we'll come on to all of that. Before we get going this morning, I just really want to get a sense of why people are here and what would be useful for them to know. So we're going to use a tool called Mentimeter. Some of you may already have come across it. Some of you may not have come across it yet. But I'm going to pop a note into the chat with a link. So if you could please go to www.menti.com. And when you land on the page, it will ask you for a code. So if you could put in the code 5307988, you should see a question come up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen so that you can see what it looks like. I'll give people a couple of seconds to get on to Mentimeter. Everyone managing to get onto Mentimeter okay? So the code is 5307988. So good first response. What would you like to know from this webinar? Is there anything I'm missing? Yeah, we can definitely try and touch upon that. Anything else that people would like to make sure we cover? Reinforce understanding of funding sources available, non-profit CICs in particular, and the best places to find funding opportunities. Yep, we can definitely talk about that. Know more about funding and access to finance for social enterprises. Absolutely, we'll talk about that. How funding for social enterprises might be affected by this. Yeah, we'll cover that. Okay, so more of the funding aspect than the access to finance. One more question about CICs. Tips and tricks. Okay, brilliant. We can make sure that we come to these tips to be successful in getting funding. Brilliant. So what I've got at the end is a sort of at Good Finance, we run lots of events, and we have lots of peer speakers, so social entrepreneurs who have taken on social investment. And I think we've spoken to over 50 in the past, and we sort of collated their 7 lessons. So we'll definitely share those at the end as well. Options are an investment in return for equity. Yep, we will touch upon that. Best resources on the Good Finance website to find the money. Good. More tricks, as it looks like funding is always for established ones and not a new startup interesting at new projects. Yeah, really interesting point, and definitely an ongoing challenge. So I should say as well that alongside working at Good Finance, I also run a small social enterprises on the side as CIC. So I've definitely been on the other side of it as well, as sort of someone that runs a small social enterprise in the CIC, and that is very new and not as established, looking for funding. And it is, yeah, it can be a challenge. So we'll definitely talk about that as well. Okay, brilliant. Thank you for providing me with all of those answers. We are going to go on to the second slide. You should see another question coming up. Oh, don't know why it's doing that. Right, so can everyone see the second one? Concerned, yes, understandable. Stressed. It's very stressful. Bewildered. Okay, good one. Okay, well, this is really interesting to know, and definitely can understand why a lot of people are there at the moment. So a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress. Oh, some optimism and some trying to stay optimistic. I guess it has been a really uncertain year, a really difficult year, and obviously has affected everyone, but especially social enterprises in very strange and unexpected ways. So what we'll try and do over the next hour or so is just to kind of address some of those worries and talk through some of those concerns and things, and hopefully leave you feeling like, even if you don't know where all the answers are, you know where to go to help find them. And so hopefully that will yeah, we'll try and cover some of those. One more before we get going. Let me see if I can get the last one up and going. Okay, so before we start, one of the sources of finance that we're going to talk about this morning is social investment, and I'd really like to get a sense of the sort of knowledge level and your comfort level with social investment at the moment. So if you could just sort of rate your own knowledge in terms of how much you know about social investment. Are you on the I'd like to know more side, or are you on the I'm already feeling quite comfortable and equipped with it? Okay, cool. So we've got 7 responses in so far. Just wait for a few more and see if that changes at all. Okay, so we are kind of looking at 1.7, 2.3. Yeah, sort of most responses down this end. Again, just good for me to know. As I carry on, please do pop any questions and things that you have in the chat, and we can sort of as we go try and pick them up, or pick them up towards the end. So I'm hoping now everyone can see my slides. Please pop a note into the chat if you're having any trouble seeing them. But yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit about finance options for social enterprises, sort of starting with really looking into social investment and repayable finance. So I think the main thing to keep in mind all the time is that you have a financial toolkit, and your toolkit will be made up of lots of different types of tools. There will be some trading, there will be potentially some donations, social investment might be an option, you might be working with banks, and you might be taking on contracts or payment by results contracts. What is really important to always keep in mind is that the things that are in your financial toolkit, they are going to change over time. And if you think of finance tools, you will need different tools to help you fix different problems and to kind of see you through different situations and circumstances. When it comes to social investment, it sits alongside donations, grants, trading contracts as another tool that you can use, that charity and social enterprises can use. So we most often see social investment used alongside these existing tools when organizations need help to buy an asset, to deliver a contract, to kickstart their organization, to grow an element of their work, or to develop new innovations. We're going to talk a little bit later about sort of the climate and some of the history and the context behind social investment and how it sort of sits alongside grants. But the really important thing to always keep in mind about social investment is that the vast majority of it, and inherently, it is repayable finance, and that is sort of the main distinguishing factor in comparison to grants, is that it is repayable. So the role of social investment in the UK is really interesting. I think so. Social enterprises and charities, as we know, are just dealing with some of the most challenging issues in the UK, from criminal justice to education to training to housing. And I think that's become even more clear and even more pressing this year. You know, we've seen during the course of the pandemic, just social enterprises and charities really step up in some very challenging times to deliver the services that they do. And inherently, social investment is the use of repayable finance to help an organisation achieve its social purpose. So what you're essentially talking about is loan finance, but where it's sort of different to traditional loan finance is that social investors and social investment looks for both financial and social return. So interestingly, 85% of social investors and charities themselves are social enterprises and charities. And one of the things that they look for in terms of how they're lending their money is, alongside the financial return, what is the social return? So yeah, it's that is sort of the inherent difference to grant. So in essence, in terms of how social investment works, we see organizations use it where they've got a track record of generating surplus through trading, or activities, contracts, grants, donations. Either way, it might be a combination, but to sort of have like an established income stream is when we sort of see organizations take it on. The surplus can then over time be used to repay social investors. What I'm going to do is play a really quick video that will hopefully hoping you will be able to hear my sound.
Across the UK, charities and social enterprises like yours are tackling some of society's biggest problems. Maybe you've set up a coffee business to give people the skills to get back into work. or are running a nursery and using the profits to support local parents. Whatever your mission, you'll need money to help with cash flow, to grow your organisation, or to buy an asset like a new building. You might even need finance to kick-start your new venture. And that money could come from traditional grants or donations, or as a loan from your local bank. One option is to get that money from a social investor. That social investor could be an organisation or an individual, and you can borrow their money or offer them shares in your organisation. But what makes a social investor different? Well, they don't just want to see a return on their investment. They want to see their money being used for good, helping you to keep delivering your social mission. Sound good? To see if it's right for you, check out goodfinance.org.uk.
Great. So a question in the chat from Rick, who says, when you say surplus, do investors take this as being fundraised and donated income plus trading income? Yes. So it will definitely depend from investor to investor, and they'll have different approaches. But yes, they will be looking for your trading income alongside grants and donations. So what I want to spend a little bit of time doing later is sort of exploring some of the tools on the Good Finance website, and maybe sort of a case study as well, so you can see how it's used in context. But what I sort of want to do before we get to that is just kind of do like a quick recap of social investment and really the history behind it and how we got to where it is. And you'll see some similarities, I think, to what's happening at the moment as well. So social investment really, it's still relatively young and new space in the UK. After the financial crisis in 2008 and then another one in 2011, the impact of the crisis was really profound on the sector, and what we saw across the board was donations from individuals fell, giving from philanthropists fell, and financial returns on assets and investments decreased, and the public sector outsourced contracts were cut or cancelled. And across the board, that sort of meant a really negative impact on social impact organisations in terms of securing vital revenue. And in the thick of the recession, social enterprises, charities, and the VCSC sector, they were really hard hit by funding cuts and decreased grant availabilities. And what did that actually mean for organisations? When you are seeing both increased demand but also decreasing resources and grants, what does that mean? And really, it meant a fight for survival for a lot of organisations, and it became just really important to think about resilience and sustainability, income generation and revenue models, and the funding and the finance required to support their organisation. So social investment sort of introduced as a tool during this time. The Big Society Capital was created to sort of build the social investment market in the UK, and it was really introduced as a tool during this time as sort of an alternative funding and finance option for organisations to consider against sort of a landscape of decreasing grants. And it isn't going to be the right thing for every organisation, and it will always be just one of the options to consider. A couple of bits of research. So this is from Charities Taking Charge, which is an NPC report, and 31% of their members identified more funding as a most important tool. 25% of charities had set up a trading subsidiary, showing kind of a move towards more commercial models, and 36% of charities had at that point, this was back in 2017, I believe, explored social investment. And then sort of coming to Social Enterprise UK and some of the more recent data in their new capitalism and crisis report. So 43% of the members surveyed says that access to finance was the biggest obstacle to sustainability and growth. 25% identified grant funding as one of the top barriers, and 18% identified debt or equity finance as a barrier still. So I think what it tells us is that funding and finance is challenging and it is a difficult thing. So a lot of the feelings earlier, from sort of stress to anxiety to concerns and feeling bewildered, I don't think anyone's unique in that. It's a really difficult landscape, and it is difficult to get right and find out the right options for your charity or social enterprise. But interestingly, one of the other things that came from the SEUK report, I think now, was that over 70% of social enterprises are making over 75% of their trading from their income from trading, and that shift to sort of like the more commercial trading is really positive if you are sort of considering social investment. And so what we see really is there are a couple of key considerations to make in terms of why you might be looking for finance, and if it comes to repayable finance, how you would actually repay it. So the first one being the purpose. What do you actually need it for? We see it used a lot for organizations that are trying to buy an asset, maintain cash flow, kickstart business, or to grow and innovate. The second is repayment, and it is just important to remember that social investment is not benevolent money. Like, you do have to pay it back. So what is your pipeline for repayment? Government contracts, rental income, membership fees, donations, trading, and what sort of avenues are you exploring that would help you repay in the longer term? And then finally, what social impact would you create? So what are your activity and outcomes? Who are you supporting? How are you measuring and reporting that? And what does sort of the sustainability of your impact look like? And that's important because 85% of social investors are actually also social enterprises and charities themselves. And they sort of, alongside the financial return, will always be looking for the social return. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to sort of go. I mean, I could talk about this all day long, but I think it's actually really important to hear from a couple of people that have been there
across the UK
and done it. So what I'm going to do is just play a case study. I'm hoping that everyone can still hear my sound okay. Pop a note in the chat if you can't. But this is a case study that we did with an organisation called Media Cultured CIC. So I'm just going to take 2 minutes now to play that so you can sort of see an example of how it was used in context.
My name is Amjid Kazia. I am the director of Media Cultured, which is a social enterprise through which we deliver education and training to schools and colleges to tackle racism and extremism and to promote community cohesion. September 11th happened, and it kind of makes you question your own place in the world as a Muslim. On a personal level, we lost a family member, my uncle Mohammed Zubair, what police believe was a racist attack. The investment that we took on board has allowed Media Cultured to move on to the next level of its growth. We needed a website, we required our own office space. That has now allowed us to build our client base. We've done presentations for the Premier League, and we're partnering various organisations across the country now.
As Police and Crime Commissioner, I'm very keen to work for a safe, tolerant and inclusive society in the Cleveland area. Media Cultured are an excellent example of an organisation that's community focused and community based. So I have a high regard for Amjid and the work that Media Cultured has done.
So whether it's a visit to a mosque, a presentation to students, or a training event for senior corporate members of any particular organisation, that's how we deliver our message, our work and our product.
We wanted to invest in Media Culture because we thought that they were dealing with a very, very tricky issue. The investment in Media Culture was structured in a way to help them test their ideas and then develop those ideas.
A piece of advice that I would give to any social entrepreneur considering taking on investment is really understand your business model. Is your business ready and in need of investment? Are you able to pay that investment back? But most importantly, to make that decision, get good advice.
One of the things that really stood out for us was the work that Amjid had done as an individual, identifying what action he wanted to take, building his business mission around his kind of personal view of the world.
We want to create a world in which people get on. Communities see past their differences and people see past their different beliefs and different creeds and religions and find common ground.
So I always just think it's so much more powerful to hear from people that have actually sort of been there and done it. So I think one of the reasons why I wanted to pay the Media Cultured CIC one is that there's often a feeling that social investment is something that's only relevant or applicable to large social enterprises and charities, and that's for huge sums of money. But actually, the average need that organisations have for social investment, the first time that they go for it is £50,000, and it can be for sort of smaller startup organisations that are looking for smaller sums of money. Does anybody have any questions about the Media Cultured CIC case study? Was everyone clear on sort of the purpose, why they were taking on social investment? Is there any questions about that? Just wait a second to see if anything comes through in the chat. How did they repay the loan? Yeah, of course. So in terms of repayment, so what Media Cultured CIC do is a lot of training and education services. So working with local schools, local councils, they sort of make their income generation through those training services, and they use the surplus from those services to pay back the loan. There's another question in there. Do you run the risk of getting your organisation into debt? Do you have to repay a set amount each month? Yes. So there is a risk element involved in taking on social investment. But it's really important to know that no social investor is going to give you social investment if they don't think that you are able to take on that risk and to pay back the amount. In terms of the set amount every month, it will completely depend on the relationship that you have with your social investor. So definitely this year, what we've seen a lot of is social investors working one-on-one with their organizations to do things like sort of capital holidays, loan repayment holidays, to adjust and to sort of respond to changes. Obviously a lot of business models and revenue impacts have been hit. And this inherently is one of the difference between social investors and traditional banks, is that when you're entering into a relationship with a social investor, it is very, very different to entering into a relationship with traditional a bank. And it is very much about the relationship, and it's a long-term relationship, and social investors work really hard, and it's a really collaborative market to ensure that they are sort of building those relationships with their organizations. Would you be personally liable? That's a really good question. I think it would depend on the legal structure of your organization, but the vast majority of the time, no, you wouldn't be personally liable. But again, it would completely depend on the actual terms and conditions of the specific loan that you were taking out. And I'll come to this in a second because there are so many different types of social investment. What's the typical cost versus a bank loan? Really good question. So the cost of capital and interest rates can completely vary across social investors. I don't know if there's a specific answer for a typical cost versus a bank loan, but you will find that quite a lot of the time social investment in terms of interest rates may work out more expensive than a bank loan. And something that we always say is, if you can get a bank loan and that's an option for you, then definitely consider it and definitely have those conversations with the banks. But what we find is that traditionally social banks and social investors do a lot of lending to organizations that aren't able to secure traditional bank loans. And so they're sort of servicing a market that might not otherwise get a traditional bank loan, so that there's sort of a bit of a trade-off there. So I touched upon this, so I'll come to this now and talk about this a little bit in terms of the different types of social investment. So There are lots of different types, but they kind of fall into two big buckets. One is debt, one is equity. So the inherent sort of principle of debt is an organization borrows money, pays it back, usually with interest over a period of time. In terms of equity, it's when an organization sells shares to an investor so that they can own a percentage of the organization. Now, there are other terms and there are other types of finance that sit in between debt and equity, and you may hear something called blended finance. So blended finance, for example, is a combination of social investment, repayable finance, and grant. So there are social investors that will sort of structure packages where it's sort of, X percentage is grant that you don't have to pay back, and the rest is social investment that you do have to pay back. And that's sort of an option that social investors have developed to kind of make social investment more accessible. And you may also hear another term called quasi-equity. And so this is another interesting one. A lot of social enterprises, depending on their legal structure, can't necessarily sell shares. So you might sort of get agreements that look close to equity, but they're not quite equity. There are also sort of two main ways that you can get social investment. The first is from an actual organization. So you may want to work with a specialist social investment firm, a social bank, or a trust or a foundation, or you might get it through an individual or individuals. So for example, crowdfunding community shares, and social investment tax relief. This is a tax relief for investors and angel investors. There's also sort of like avenues of working with individuals that enable you to get social investment. So one of the things that I wanted to do is just give you a very quick demo of the Good Finance website, because I think there are a couple of tools here that could be really helpful, and actually with regards to some of the questions in the chat will help answer some of the questions. So the first one here is it right for us? And this is sort of, it literally like a 2-minute tool, and you sort of just go into it and you put in the legal form of your organization, how long you've been operating, where you are, your annual income, do you know what you need the money for? Do you know how you'd repay it? Do you know your social impact? Do you have a business plan? You don't actually have to fill this part out, and you essentially just click next, and the tool will tell you yes, no, social investment could be an option for you, and it will also tell you what type of social investment. So based on that, we think debt or equity and this type. Because the thing to remember is that when it comes to types of social investment, whilst I've sort of explained debt and equity, you can break it down a lot further, and there are actually lots of different types. So you can get charity bonds, you can get community shares, you can equity, quasi-equity, secured loans, unsecured loans. I mean, I'll be honest, I work in the social investment space, and I couldn't tell you the ins and outs of every single one of them. Like it's a big landscape, there's lots of social investors, there's lots of different types. But what I would really recommend doing is spending a little bit of time on the Good Finance Is It Right For Us diagnostic tool, and just working out whether it is an option for you. And then if it is, it will tell you what type of social investment, and you can go on and read about it. The other thing that's sort of worth looking at as well is, once you have a sense of if it could or couldn't be right for you, and you actually want to know where to get the money from, that was one of the things that came up. What we have on here is a fund and an investor directory, and you can actually go on and you can put in your location, the amount you're looking for, the financial product, the social issue, and filter your results. And what we'll do, it will pull from the investor directory. So this is sort of the most comprehensive directory that exists of social investments and social investors funds. I think we have about 150 different investors and funds on here. And it will tell you which ones, based on what you're looking for, is the most relevant for you. And if you sort of then just go in and say click into a profile, you can see the contact details and how to get to that organization. So if you're sort of actively looking into considering, this investor directory is also a really good place to start. So, who are the funders? What do different investors look like? So if you sort of think of the landscape as a bit of a spectrum, On one side, you have social return being the key thing. And on the other side, you have financial return. And what you'll find is on the social return side, that's the key thing that organizations who are delivering finance and funding in that space are looking for. What you'll find is that there's a lot more philanthropy happening there. And on the financial side, where organizations are mainly looking for financial return, you'll see that's a lot more traditional investment, whether that's bank loans or sort of commercial VC lending. It tends to be a lot more about financial return. Investment sits somewhere in the middle, looking at both social return and financial return. And what you'll find is that the funders within the social investment space can come from either end of that spectrum. So we do have a lot of trusts and foundations that provide social investment. So there are organizations like Esme Fairbairn, CAF Bank and CAF Venturesome, who sort of fall more towards that end of the spectrum, sort of bigger trusts and foundations, but they do some social investment and social lending. On the other side, you sort of have individual investors that might come from a more sort of finance or commercial background who do a bit sort of investment that is more sort of geared towards traditional investment. And somewhere in the middle here is that you have social investment fund managers and social banks. Social banks are organizations like Triodos, CAF Bank, Unity Bank, banks that have inherently a social purpose. And then social investment fund managers are sort of organizations that manage funds and manage pots of social investment money, and they sort of again sit in sort of the middle of the spectrum. Now what's really interesting to know about this is, depending on where on this spectrum they come from, that will sort of affect the cost of capital and the interest rates and how much risk an organization is able to take, because it will sort of depend on their source of, where their money comes from as well. So it's always just interesting thinking about, who is the social investor in this situation and where is their money coming from? And that will give you an indication of the sort of the risk that they are able and willing to take. So one final thing I want to come to, and I will stop talking after that, and I will let you ask some questions. And we'll also say that if there's questions that I don't know, I will follow up internally and get you the answers too. But inherently, over the course of the 3 years that Good Finance has existed, we've had over 150,000 visitors to the website. We've done over 50, probably 60 events now, and we are very user-led, so we spend a lot of time talking to charities and social enterprises and really trying to get a sense of what the journey has truthfully been like, and sort of the warts and all story. And our goal always is to help you work out whether social investment is or isn't right for you, and it may be that it isn't, and that's absolutely fine. But it may also be something for you to consider. And over the course of sort of working with our users and really speaking to people, these are the 7 key lessons that we've learned from people who have been there and done it. So first and foremost, social investment is not benevolent money, and that's really important to remember. You will have to repay. There will be different terms and conditions around the repayment, how much it's going to be, how often you're going to have to pay it, are there any extra different fees, can I get a holiday if I've had a really rough year because of COVID? Different social investors have their own individual approaches, and their goal is always to serve you in the best way possible, but inherently their goal is that you have to repay that money. There is a lot of flexibility there, but unlike grant, you will eventually have to repay it, and it's really important to remember that it's not benevolent money. The second one, impact matters. It really does. I was at Good Finance, 2 years ago. We actually did a audit of all of our social investors, and I was really surprised. I didn't realize quite how many themselves were social enterprises and charities. And what it means for them is that they have their own reporting that they have to do on the impact and on the impact that their capital makes. And so they will absolutely be looking for your impact as well. And what you will often find is that where the best social investment deals are made is where there's sort of an alignment of sort of values and priorities, and you may find social investors who invest into your area. There was a question in, when we talked about what you wanted to sort of get out of this session, somebody mentioned something about sporting or organizations. And for example, there are a couple of social investors, Sporting Capital and Sporting Assets, where you would find that maybe those sort of values align in terms of the impact that you're making. Number 3, it's about so much more than the money. It is when you're working with social investors, you are entering into a long-term relationship, and for all intents and purposes, it's like dating. There's got to be a good fit there. There's got to be good chemistry. There's got to be good relationship, a lot of honesty, because you're going to be working, if you take this on, you'll likely be working with a social investor over a period of years, and it's about so much more than the money. And that there are different sides to that as well. So I think this year the question of how social is social investment has really been challenged and been really it's come to the forefront, and we've seen a lot of social investors having to really adapt and pause and really listen to their investees in order to respond to the ongoing pandemic. And it is about so much more than the money. That being said, honesty is always the best policy. So if you're in early stage conversations with social investors, be super honest. And if you have social investment, be super honest. It's something that they say all the time is honesty is the best policy. Why isn't it cheaper if it's social? We get asked that a lot, like why aren't the interest rates lower if it's social? I can definitely fall down a rabbit hole trying to explain the cost of capital and why social investment costs what it does. But the inherent principle of social investment is that it's not a pot of money that runs out. So if you lend to one organization, they pay it back with interest. The interest hopefully has covered the cost involved in lending the money in the first place. And because you paid it back, it's gone back into the pot, and that can then be used to go to another charity, to go to another social enterprise. So the hope is that, unlike grant money, it's not a pot that runs out, which is why there's an interest rate that is charged. Due diligence isn't fun, but it does make your business better. This is something that we hear from organizations considering it a lot, is that what paperwork do I have to do, like what accounts do I need, what things am I going to have to submit from Companies House? And again, there's no one size fits all answer. Social investors will take different approaches, which can be frustrating at times, but the process of due diligence helps you to really get to grips with your organization and what you're doing. So whilst it might not be the most enjoyable thing, it does make you think about your work from a very strategic and critical mindset, which can be a good thing. And finally, it always takes longer than you think. So it does take time. And again, much like dating, it takes time to demonstrate what you need, how you need it, build that relationship, get the money in the bank, go through the process. It does take a lot of time. So I'm seeing a couple of questions come through in the chat, so I'm going to try and answer that. So major difference could be that you would be personally liable with a bank loan. So I'm actually going to go away and ask this question around personal liability, because I think it's a really good one, and I'll make sure that we come back to it. But yeah, the liability structures are slightly different than they are to bank loans. Is crowdfunding considered a form of social investment? So yes and no. Some crowdfunding isn't, because you don't have to pay it back in any way, shape or form. You don't have to give away any equity. Some crowdfunding is. So sometimes crowdfunding or community shares, where essentially you give out community shares and the community owns a little bit of the organization, is considered social investment. We know we want to measure and demonstrate impact. Is there anywhere we can access a range of tools to help us measure and demonstrate? Yes, and I'm really glad that somebody has asked that question. So you'll see on the Good Finance website here, there's a section called Measuring Social Impact. So we've got a little explainer video, and really important to understand that the tools on here are about social impact for social investment. So this is very much targeted to the social investment space. We've got a sort of section on various guides and resources that we use. And then finally, we have a tool on here called the Outcomes Matrix. And this is one of the most used tools on the Good Finance website. I think we've had over 50,000 users of this. But essentially, it's a matrix that splits out your outcomes. And what you can do is sort of go through and add outcomes and sort of save them, and it will let you sort of download a PDF version, so you have already, you've got a reference point of, these are our outcomes and how we measure them. The other place that I always recommend, and this isn't just for social investment, but really any sort of impact measurement, is Inspiring Impact. So Inspiring Impact is just packed with impact measurement tools, and again, like Good Finance, was very user-led. So it was developed by charities and social enterprises for charities and social enterprises, and so they've got a whole host of tools on here. They've got their impact methodology, and yeah, just a lot. If you're looking at looking for impact measurement, there is a lot on there. So I want to wrap up with a few more sort of Mentimeter questions, but before I do that, does anyone have any other questions or thoughts? Anything else that they would like to know about? I should just say the other thing that I do quickly want to come to is, if I just show you very quickly this, during the COVID crisis, we created a resource hub for charities and social enterprises. And whilst the investor directory is full of social investors, on this hub here, there is also a breakdown of different UK-wide and regional grants that you can access if you go to the COVID-19 hub. And just recognizing at the moment that social investment might not be the right tool for everyone, and that a lot of organizations will be looking for grant money, we would really recommend, if you are, to check out COVID-19 Resource Hub. The other place that I would really recommend checking out is Pioneers Post, who have a very in-depth update. They update all the time, is sort of UK-wide and regional, European, global grants for charities and social enterprises. So if grant is something that you're looking for, then yeah, go to the COVID-19 Hub and to Pioneers Post, really in-depth bits in there. Okay, now I really will stop talking. Does anybody have any more questions or anything for me? If not, what we'll do is come back to the Mentimeter and just do a couple of final questions. So if everybody goes back to Mentimeter, if you go back to www.menti.com and use the code 5307988, it should hopefully a couple of people with us. Okay, so what we're going to do is I could do a very quick quiz and then ask you some more questions. So question number one. Let's do it. What's the average size of investment need for a social enterprise or charity? Okay, great. No, not so great. Okay, so we had most. Oh, sorry. I actually think this is a mistake that I've made on the back end, because it is £50,000. Sorry, that's my mistake. So 9 of you had that right. Yes, the average size of investment need for a social enterprise or charity is £50,000, which is interesting, because I think a lot of the time people think it's a lot more, but it is 50,000. Second question. Let's hope I've got this one right. What percentage of social investors are charities and social enterprises themselves? Yeah, so managed to get this one right on the back end. 85% of the social investors listed on the Good Finance investor directory, which is the most sort of comprehensive list of social investors in the UK, 85% of them, we actually went through and looked at every single one of their legal structures, and 85% of them are charities and social enterprises themselves, which really is one of the biggest differences to traditional lending. Last question for you. I'm sorry, my mentee needs to. Give me 1 second. Let me see if I can get the last question back up. Sorry, you'd have thought I'd have learned how to work out all of the tech issues right now, but not quite. Okay, final question. What percentage of SE 100 winners have taken on social investors? So investment. So the SE 100 is an annual list that comes out of the top 100 social enterprises in the UK. What percentage would you guess have taken on social investment? Oh, yeah, it is. The vast majority of you got that right. So yeah, 60% of the organizations on that list have in fact taken on social investment. Final one from me, not so much a quiz question, but just to get a sense of whether you found this session helpful in terms of where you started. How would you say your knowledge of social investment is now? So 5 if you're feeling sort of comfortable, equipped, you know where to go. 1 if you just feel like you still really just need to know more. Right, so we're sort of at 3.5. I think we were at like the 1.72 mark. So definitely glad that people have found it helpful, which is always nice to know. So that is everything from me. I'm hoping that was helpful. There's one more question. Did you say there's sort of international social investment directory for Access Worldwide rather than UK based? So it's not so much a directory, but if you go on to Pioneer's post, their work and their coverage is a lot more international than Good Finance. Good Finance is very UK focused. The Pioneers Post do have an ongoing list of opportunities that are European and global. So yeah, that is all from me. I'm really hoping that you found it helpful. And what I would say is, if you do think that this could be an option for you, then spend some time on the Good Finance website. Definitely do the diagnostic tool. And yeah, tweet us or get in touch if you've got any more questions about social investment. And yeah, that's all right. Thank you very much for having me. I hope that was useful. And yeah, I hope that even if you're still feeling a bit stressed and a bit anxious about finance and funding, that you at least have a sense of like where to go and where to look, and that there are still lots of possibilities out there. I would say as well is keep coming back to the Good Finance Investor Directory, because lots of the organizations on there are releasing new funds, but a lot of the organizations on there also do grants. So it's worth sort of working through and following them and looking at what's happening at the moment. Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ashita. That was brilliant. Thank you so much for your time this morning. And thank you for everyone who attended the webinar as well. I just quickly wanted to add one last thing.
Thank you for bearing with my tech issues.
Not at all, it happens all the time. One quick last thing, our SE UK Futures event is a digital summit just around the corner. It happens on the end of November, and it's a great opportunity for us to come together and celebrate the sector, as well as setting the scene for social enterprises after the pandemic. There are some great speakers confirmed, and do come and join us if you can. I've put the link in the chat. So yeah, do come and sign up for that if you're free for the dates.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone. It was really helpful.
Thank you.
From Ashita. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.